Live from the Missouri Theater in Columbia, this is the 2020 Missouri Gubernatorial Forum, presented by the Missouri Press Association and KOMU-8.
Right now, you're taking a look outside of the historic Missouri Theater on this Friday afternoon, where we are hosting today's Missouri Gubernatorial Forum. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Emily Spain with KOMU-8 News. On behalf of KOMU-8 and the Missouri School of Journalism, welcome to the Missouri Press Association Governor's Forum. This is an event the Press Association sponsors every 4 years, and we are pleased the University of Missouri has partnered with us to broadcast this year's event from the historic Missouri Theater. Like everything in 2020, things are a little different this year, beginning with the fact that the theater today is not open to the public. Our massive stage does allow everyone to stay physically separated, so that is why I am not wearing a mask this afternoon. A few campaign staffers and members of the media are joining us today in the auditorium, but I do still need to remind everyone to avoid applause or other reactions during today's forum. Joining our candidates on stage this afternoon, the executive editor of the Columbia Missourian, Ruby Bailey, Gary Castor, managing editor of the Jefferson City News Tribune, Tricia Miller, editor and publisher of the Washington Missourian, along with myself representing KOMU-8 News. Now I am pleased to introduce our moderator today from the Jefferson City Bureau of the Associated Press, David Lieb.
Thank you, Emily. I'd like to introduce the candidates and go over a few rules of the debate. Earlier today, candidates drew numbers to determine the order in which they will be making opening remarks. They are arranged on the stage in that order, starting farthest from me, Democratic State Auditor Nicole Galloway, Libertarian Party candidate Rik Combs, Republican Governor Mike Parson, and Green Party candidate Jerome Bauer. After their opening statements, I will ask the first question. Then we will proceed to questions from our four panelists. Candidates will have 1 minute to answer each question. After each has had a turn, I will decide whether any rebuttal time is necessary. If so, candidates will receive an additional 30 seconds, but rebuttals will be reserved only for those candidates involved in criticisms. If candidates fail to answer a question, I also reserve the right to ask them to try again during the rebuttal time. The first question will go to the candidate farthest away from me. The second question will begin with the second candidate, and so forth. Candidates will receive 2 minutes for a closing statement. Closing remarks will be delivered in reverse order from the opening remarks. Audio and visual notifications will occur as time is about to expire. Candidates, please adhere to the stop signs. Finally, due to the coronavirus, today's forum is occurring in front of a limited audience of media members and a few supporters of each candidate. Audience, please hold your response and your applause until today's event is over. With that, let's begin. Nicole Galloway, you may deliver your opening statement.
Thank you. This election comes down to whose side you're on and who you're fighting for. I am running for governor to put Jefferson City back on the side of working families and to act with urgency to protect our fellow Missourians. The most important thing the next governor will have to do is contain the spread of the virus and rebuild Missouri's economy. The question is, will we rebuild in a way that helps working folks get back on their feet, or will we continue to ignore science, distract, and rebuild only for well-connected special interests? Governor Parson has been part of the broken system for years that delivers for insiders. He asks what's in it for himself while Missourians struggle. Missourians deserve a governor that will act to defeat this virus, to rebuild our broken economy, lower health care costs, and actually fight crime before an election year. Governor Parson has failed the test of leadership, and it is time for a change.
Rik Combs.
Thank you, David. It's truly an honor to be here today. And first of all, I want to thank the Missouri Press Association, KOMU, and the Missouri Theater for hosting this. Our campaign's pretty simple. It's based on limited government, smaller government, more efficient government, free enterprise always, and to protect private property. That in mind, and that said, what Missourians will have to figure out pretty soon is what type of government they want. Do they want a large government? Do they want a limited government? And Missourians are going to have that choice on November 3rd. Thank you very much.
Mike Parson.
First of all, thank you for having me up here. I thank the Missouri Press Association, and I appreciate all the candidates that are up here on the stage today for being part of the process. For me, it started as a very humble beginning in Wheatland, Missouri, where I grew up in a town of 356 people, where I grew up with a strong family with Christian values, moral values, with what hard work really means, what being a good neighbor means, what being respect means to individuals. I went to work at 14 years old. I served in the United States Army for 2 tours of duty overseas and learned then how to respect one another, what I was really representing fighting for. I then become home, I become the local sheriff there. I was a small business owner. I'm a farmer as is today, a husband, a father, and a grandparent. Those life skills are what makes you to be a leader in the state of Missouri. Those are the qualities I will bring to Jefferson City.
Jerome Bauer.
I'm Jerome Bauer, Green for Governor, running on a platform stressing universal health care, disability rights and universal design, and transportation accessibility and equity. My time spent without health care almost cost me my life 3 times in the last decade. Before I got disability Medicare and the Missouri blind pension with Medicaid, I almost lost my Medicaid. I received one of those adverse action notices 2 years ago, along with 100,000 Missouri children who got kicked off Medicaid. I managed to get it straightened out at the last possible minute, but not everybody is so lucky. Healthcare is a human right. If elected, I promise to work cooperatively to establish cooperatives of all kinds, and also work for a universal basic income in exchange for universal basic service. Let's bring back the Civilian Conservation Corps and other Roosevelt-era New Deal works projects. Let's have education and vocational training for all. Thank you.
Thank you. We will now move to the question part of our debate. The first question will go first to you, Nicole Galloway, and here it is. The most recent report from the White House Coronavirus Task Force listed Missouri in the red zone for new COVID-19 cases, among the top 10 states nationally. Hospitalizations for the virus recently reached an all-time high in Missouri. How do you rate the state's response to the coronavirus, and what, if any, additional steps should be taken? Go ahead.
We need a complete reset on our coronavirus strategy. I have outlined a plan based on data, on containment, on mitigation, on masks, science-backed, data-proven ways to get this virus under control and prevent community spread. So we can get our lives back. We can open our schools again, and we can repair our economy. You know, Governor Parson talks a lot about the 4 pillars of his plan, but those pillars are crumbling on each other because hospitalizations are up. Today we had the highest reported number of deaths today. This is not over. The White House is imploring us to take action, yet Governor Parson refuses to listen to that expert advice. 2,400 Missourians have died from this virus since March. And when Governor Parson was asked if he took responsibility for his government's response to this virus, he said no and compared it to car crashes. This has been a failed test of leadership.
Rik Combs.
Thank you, David. First of all, I would not have agreed to a stay-at-home order, and the reason is I like the Swedish model where the Swedes implored people to do all the proper safety procedures, but they didn't close anything down. And I think it's not the government's position, and I don't think the government has the authority to make people stay home. I don't think it's the government's place to have people deemed essential or non-essential. And I think what we could do is open the state up fully And I believe that the herd immunity would take control and attenuation would help as far as lowering the death rate on the virus. Thank you very much.
Mike Parson.
Thank you. We've took a balanced approach from day one. We've actually reached out to Washington University, MU, to the Missouri Hospital Association, to the experts in Missouri, and put a plan together. The Show Me Strong recovery plan with PPE, with testing, and we went from 2,000 tests a week to over 125,000 today. In a couple of weeks, we'll have testing in every school in the state of Missouri. The hospitals, when they first became about, we could build hospitals in this state in 10 to 11 days. The Missouri Hospital Association has been part of this planning every day, taking care of our citizens every day. The data that we've got from 10 of the most expert infectious disease doctors in Missouri has helped us guide our state. In April, when our death rate was at 8%, close to 8%, today it is at 0.7. And we are on the right track on this state, but we have to do a combination of fighting a virus, fighting the economy, and getting our kids back in school.
Jerome Bauer.
I agree with what Nicole Galloway said about this, but I really want to stress the wearing of masks, the importance of that, and setting a good example by wearing a mask. I'm not wearing mine right now because it will probably muffle my voice, but every time I go outside walking around on the street, I wear a mask even though it's probably not strictly necessary, just because I want to set a good example. Let's have a mask mandate, but we can't enforce a law if people don't voluntarily follow it. The motto of my doctoral alma mater, the University of Pennsylvania, is Leges sine moribus vanae. Laws without morals are useless. People have to want to obey the law. And there should be a legal sanction if people don't obey, just so that there's some recourse. But people have to want to do it, and we all have to set a good example for each other.
I'm going to allot 30 seconds here to follow up on a statement that Auditor Galloway made. She cited a quote from Governor Parson in which she said that the governor had failed to take responsibility, or when asked, are you responsible for what's happening basically in Missouri, that he responded, no. Governor, can you respond to that? 30 seconds.
I've never said that I wasn't responsible. When you're the governor, you're responsible for everybody in the state of Missouri. One, you have to go to work, and you have to make sure you're doing your job, as we've done from the beginning. Look, every day we get up, we're concerned about the safety of Missouri citizens in this state, and have been since day one, and we'll continue to do that. And we will put everything on the table we can. We'll bring all the experts in our state, and to make sure that people are safe. And by doing that, we converted 200 businesses in the state of Missouri to make PPE in this state, simply because they were trying to help us at that time. And I thank those businesses, and I thank those frontline employees for what they're doing every day.
Governor says he's never denied that or never stated that. Back to you, Nicole.
This summer, he was asked by I believe it was a KOMU reporter, if he took responsibility for the government's response, his government's response, and he said no, and he compared it to car crashes. You know, he mentions working every day, but what he's doing every day isn't working because we continue to be in a red zone. We have to take action and act urgently to contain the spread of this virus so we can get our economy open again. We can get our schools open again. Folks can get back to life. We can go to Mizzou games again. We continue to fall in the wrong direction. We are living the governor's coronavirus fighting strategy right now. It's not working.
David.
We now need to go to questions from our panelists, and Governor, if you need more time to respond, you can do so in this first question. Just one thing. I'd just like to respond when she says we haven't been at work. I invite the public, Governor, I invite anybody to look at our work calendars and really see who was at work for the last 5 months. The first question, Tricia Miller, that comes from you.
So we've seen different hot spots around the state. When it comes to COVID-19, how much direction should the state exert over local control on topics such as local stay-at-home orders, mask ordinances, and COVID liability protections?
We should be very involved.
This question goes first to Rik Combs.
Okay. Thank you. I think the governor has a big part in setting the tone and the tenor of a state. And I think when the governor comes out and says, I'm going to leave it to the local folks, whether they do mask mandates or business shutdowns, things like that, I think that's an abrogation of our responsibility. As governor, I would strongly encourage municipalities, counties, and the like to open up for business and open up as normal. Thank you.
Governor Parson.
To answer the question, as I think you want to do a balanced approach is what we've done from the beginning. We want the local officials to have input. No one person should try to be making mandates for the entire state of Missouri. It's a very diverse state, whether you have the urban areas or whether you have the rural areas. We should support the local levels, the school systems, the counties, the healthcare. When we got the CARES Act in the state of Missouri, we had that money out the door in 10 days to get to the local levels, to help with testing, to help with contact tracing, to make sure our schools could start back up as we move forward on that. Again, it's a partnership. It's a partnership with the state and the local communities. But people at home should have a say in the rules and regulations that are placed on them and should have representation for that. And we've stated that balanced approach from the beginning.
Jerome Bauer.
I certainly agree that we need a balanced approach to everything, as much local control as possible, but also a rational science-based policy. And the governor and the state government certainly has an important role, not just to make rules for everybody, but especially to set a good example. So I agree with a balanced science-based approach, and also to being very flexible and responsive to. Thank you. Responsive to new facts that we learned about, and to keep the public informed at all times. And also, the politicians shouldn't be the ones at the podium when we're talking about public health issues, because in any given room, half the people didn't vote for that particular politician and will do just the opposite of whatever he or she says.
Nicole Galloway.
I support a statewide mask rule for the state of Missouri because it is a science-backed, data-proven way to contain the spread of the virus. And a majority of Missourians agree with that. They see it as their ticket to freedom, so we can get our schools open again. The virus doesn't respect county lines or town lines. Some of our highest surges in cases are in our rural areas. Governor Parson has a do as I say, not as I do approach. When he's in the governor's office during the week, he encourages folks to wear masks. When he goes to campaign rallies on the weekends, he tells folks, don't wear a dang mask if you don't want to. When he leaves it up to just local government guidance, he's telling even his supporters to ignore that local government guidance and tell them they can ignore it and they don't have to wear a mask if they don't want to. We need a leader that is more engaged in containing this virus.
Governor Parson, I'll give you 30 seconds on that. She says you have a do as I say, not as I do approach. Your response?
This is starting to look like the bickering on the national level is what it's starting about. But I think people in Missouri remember what's going on. I have never said those things in my career, nor will I. What I've told people is we're going to take a balanced approach every day where you want the safety of Missourians. But again, we're going to do that all together. And to try to blame somebody for a virus, there's a lot of people out there doing incredible things every day in our hospital associations, in our hospitals, the nurses and the doctors. It is a virus. It is dangerous. We've said that from day one to take the necessary steps to do that, and we'll continue to do that.
Nicole Galloway, back to you.
We do have incredible healthcare workers, first responders that are on the front lines of this virus, and leaders of our hospital groups, physician leaders, are asking for a statewide mask rule because it is a proven way to contain the spread of this virus, protect the public health, get our economy going again. We need a governor that will act with urgency to protect us from this virus.
The next question comes from Emily Spain.
What has the COVID-19 pandemic exposed about Missouri's healthcare system, whether that's strengths or weaknesses, and what would you do to improve it?
Governor Parson, you're first on this one.
Yeah, I think the one thing we learned is we were way too dependent on foreign countries to start off with this pandemic. The other thing you had to realize right away, there's nothing on the internet that tells you there's no playbook to how to deal with this virus. And the experts, quote, on the East and West Coast didn't know. We had to develop our own data plan using the Missouri Hospital Association, using those infectious disease doctors, using WashU to be able to do that. MU, and all the experts we could to build our own dashboard that was a model dashboard for the United States of America, I might add, to be able to implement policy in, such as mobile testing sites. Where do they go? Where do we deliver hundreds and thousands of masks? When executive director in Jackson County, Frank White, asked, we delivered them the next day. But we knew how to do that. We learned what box-in strategy was for our nursing home, for our meat processing plants, for the people that were really at high risk, the African-American community. That's what we did by taking a balanced approach. That's what we did when we built the Show Me Strong recovery plan.
Jerome Bauer.
Our nation once had a first-rate pandemic response force, task force. Trump administration gutted it and left everything to local control, very chaotic, no system at all. So I would certainly work to develop a pandemic task force in the state of Missouri, and I would certainly rely on the resources of our first-rate university systems, for example, especially Washington University and St. Louis University, two very first-rate medical schools. I'm really intrigued to learn that WashU and SLU have opened up their campuses, and they're not having clusters of COVID, so they're doing something right.
Nicole Galloway.
What COVID has done is shown cracks in our system that have existed for a long time, but they have gotten wider and deeper with COVID-19, and particularly on the issue of health care. We have 7 rural hospitals that have closed in the last several years. We have 250,000 working Missourians that don't have access to insurance because we have yet to expand Medicaid, though voters did approve that in August. And it's estimated because of this pandemic, 100,000 Missourians have lost their health care that they got through their employer. I support Medicaid expansion and implementing it in a way to keep our rural hospitals open, to make sure that working people can have access to health care, particularly in the midst of this pandemic. You know, where you live shouldn't dictate where you can get your health care or if you have access to health care. And it's particularly cruel that Governor Parson opposes Medicaid expansion in the midst of this pandemic.
Rik Combs.
Yes, I look at our healthcare systems, and the one I'm most familiar with are the ones right around Jefferson City where we live. And I do agree that we have an over-reliance on foreign equipment and medicines and things to make medicines with. We've got an over-reliance on that, and we need to react to that. One of the things I thought of as this pandemic got started and got rolling, there was like an overemphasis on COVID-19. And I saw a lot of people being laid off or furloughed in our medical systems and a lot of procedures being put on the back burner. I think the stay at home and lockdowns, I think that creates a lot of health issues such as depression, suicide, and a whole lot of other issues there. So once again, I'd like to say no mandatory masks, no mandatory vaccines, and open this state up. Thank you.
Next question from Ruby Bailey.
The COVID-19 pandemic has led to an economic downturn and that has impacted states and local governments. As governor, what would be your first steps to mitigate that impact?
Jerome Bauer, you're first.
Well, I would have a universal basic income for all, and also we can do much better than Medicaid expansion. We really need Medicare for all. We need a single-payer system. How are we going to pay for that? Well, the Missouri Green Party Economics Platform, which we passed 4 years ago, recommends a Wall Street robo-transaction tax. I personally don't know how we were going to implement that. I'm not a computer scientist, but this is an idea that's been floated around for quite a while. So having a universal health care, we can do much better than Medicaid expansion. We can do much better than Obamacare. That's just a stopgap measure. We really need to recognize that health care is a human right.
Nicole Galloway.
Our state and local budgets are hurting because of the economic impacts of COVID. And so the first thing to do is to take action to contain the spread of the virus so we can get our economy going again. We've seen an increase in jobless claims even this week, and so we're continuing to slide backwards. We also have hundreds of millions of dollars of CARES Act money that is just stuck at the state. And as governor, I would be much more engaged in deploying these resources to help our local communities, to help small businesses, to help those that have lost their job through no fault of their own because of the economic impacts of COVID. And as state auditor, I have seen waste and fraud, abuse in government. I've identified over $370 million worth. And so I would look for efficiencies within government so we can have the resources needed to help our communities.
Rik Combs.
Yes, when it comes to the economy, I think we have, as everybody knows by now, I'm a big proponent of the free enterprise system. I think there's an over-reliance on government and an over-reliance on government to answer all the big questions and to control and run our lives. I think the free enterprise system needs to be unleashed. We need fewer regulations, fewer rules, and we need to get the government out of healthcare and other aspects of the economy as much as possible. I have trust and faith in Missouri businesses, and I have trust and faith in the Missouri people, and there's nothing that Missourians cannot do if they put their mind to something. Thank you.
Mike Parson.
First of all, again, with a balanced approach, we are 12th in the United States of America getting people back to work. At the peak of this, at 365,000 people that lost their jobs, over 200,000 of those people have went back to work. We left our businesses open. We got our economy going back. As of last month, consumer spending was up 6.3%. When all the experts said our state would be at 16 unemployment this time of year, right now, as I stand in front of you, it is at 7, and we continue to bring businesses to our state. We just opened up Chewy Pet Food, 1,200 new jobs in Belton, Missouri. We got our schools back in place. We brought new businesses here as the virus goes on. Again, this is a balanced approach. You got to be able to deal with the virus. You got to be able to deal with the economy. You got to get kids back in school safely. And by doing the plan we had in place, we have accomplished all of those, and we continue to move forward in this state.
We're going to have one more question before we take a break. That comes from Gary Castor.
There was a substantial learning loss this spring when schools switched to remote learning due to the pandemic. What strategy should the state pursue to regain this lost ground and put schools back on a better path of instruction?
Nicole Galloway.
My kids go to school up the street from my house. I want our schools to open. You know, it is vital for our kids, but it's also vital for our economy so parents can get back to work. And I have outlined a plan for appropriate learning models to keep kids safe, to keep teachers safe, so we can get our schools open again based on positivity rates that are within the community. So I have laid out that plan. You know, schools made a tough decision earlier this spring to shut down, and Governor Parson did little planning to help them fully reopen this fall, and instead went on the radio in July and said it didn't matter how bad COVID is in our state, that kids are going to get COVID when they go back to school and they'll just get over it. That's not good enough. We need a real plan to open up our schools. And if that was his plan, it's not working because thousands and thousands of our children are learning online or only in school 1 or 2 days a week.
Rik Combs.
Yes, I think schools opening is a very important thing. I think we should have the schools open. I'm a big proponent of local control. Once again, I think there's too much state and too much federal control over our education systems. But we have to get these schools open and get the kids in school. I think the virtual learning or the online learning, I think that'll prove to be a failure for a myriad of reasons. But I really do believe we need to get kids in school. The danger to children is not so great as it is to older folks and folks with comorbidities. And I think we need to get the kids right in there to school. They're going to be exposed to a lot of things besides COVID-19, but it's important we do get those children in school and we do get our children educated.
Mike Parson.
Thank you. Well, first of all, 85% of our schools are open. 75% of the kids in our state are in class or a hybrid version because of the actions we took through the summer to make sure these kids were safe to go back to school. And I thank the administrators around the state for their input in making sure those kids could go back to their, I trust those local levels. I trust those board members. I trust them to do the job they are. 900,000 kids in the state of Missouri. When everybody was just saying, shut it down, 465,000 of those kids are on free and reduced lunches. 125,000 of them are disabled, learning disabilities. You've got to have a plan in place. How you're going to feed them, how you're going to get health care, how you're going to keep them safe. It's not as easy as just shutting things off and going home and putting the covers over your head thinking everything's going to be okay someday. You have to have those plans in place and you have to work. Nothing's more important than keeping those kids safe. We've done that all summer long since this all started. That's why kids are back in school and they are there in a safe environment.
Jerome Bauer.
Sending kids back to school is really important, but I think it's important to keep the pandemic in perspective. It's not going to last forever, and it's important to err on the side of safety when our children's health is at stake. So I think it's really, really important that school administrators be flexible and do the right thing and close the school down or go back to distance learning if an outbreak occurs. And in order to make that effective, everybody, all students, all across, at every income level, have to have access to computer equipment and broadband internet. And it should be accessible and universally designed so that people like me who really can't see can use it as well. And one thing I've learned since going blind, since losing my eyesight, is that we are an afterthought. Almost nothing is really set up for us.
That concludes our first round of questioning. We're going to take a short break, and when we return, we'll be opening up with a new topic. Stay tuned. Welcome back to the 2020 Missouri Press Association gubernatorial debate. We're now ready to begin our next round of questioning. The first question in this round will come from Tricia Miller.
Missouri has seen a rise in crime primarily in the state's urban areas. The state recently held a special session devoted to addressing violent crime. As governor, do you believe additional steps are necessary to address crime? And if so, what would you propose?
This goes first to you, Rik Combs.
Yes, thank you for the question. Violent crime and crime in general is a big issue, especially in our metro areas. I don't think our emphasis is in the right place, though. I think our emphasis needs to be on drugs and gangs, and I think that's a big part of what we're seeing in our metro areas. What I would like to do is get together a good task force involving federal agents and for the state police and locals to go in and start working on some of these gang issues and some of these drug cartel trafficking routes that we have through Kansas City, St. Louis, and now even Springfield. And I believe there's more gang activity in Columbia and Jefferson City than what's admitted to or what we want to believe or admit to. So that's what I would like to do, is do a joint combined effort on gangs and drugs and these drug cartels. Thank you.
Governor Parson.
I don't think there's any governor probably took more interest in this simply because I've got 22 years of law enforcement experience and been in the urban areas more than I have in 2.5 years, working with people like Better Family Life to find solutions on the street, working with the Urban League, just recently $1 million grant to help de-escalate crime up there, to work with the clergy in St. Louis, to understand what Grill for Glory events are, to meet people in the streets, boots on the ground. What we need more police officers is what we need. We need to be able to do that, to fight violent crime. We need to partner with the federal, the state, and the locals, which is exactly what we did. Yesterday, we're going to get more police officers because of a special session we did. The number one issue for all mayors, St. Louis, Kansas City, Columbia, Springfield, law enforcement, was the witness protection plan. That's exactly why I called a special session, why we got those two things done, why we're fighting crime every day. And I will continue to do that and support the men and women that wear those uniforms every day.
Jerome Bauer.
I co-organized a panel, a Black and Green Wednesday panel in St. Louis on gun violence. And we had a couple of speakers there from the Cure Violence program, which the city of St. Louis is supporting. And this is based on an epidemiological model and involves people from the community working to interrupt violence when it occurs. So please, can we let that work instead of trying to send in more police officers and over-police communities of color, because that only makes it worse. It just escalates the situation. Concerning crime in general, I believe, we the Green Party believe that addiction problems of all kinds should be treated to the extent possible more as mental health and public health issues and not so much as criminal justice issues.
Nicole Galloway.
As a mom, nothing is more important than the safety of our communities, which is why I have introduced a comprehensive plan to get to the root causes of crime. The lack of economic opportunity, disinvestment in education and healthcare that has been happening for a long time. And I stand with 90% of Missourians that want to see some common sense gun safety rules like background checks. Violent crime has been rising for years under Governor Parson's watch. And last year, as communities were begging for action, he called a special session to give tax breaks for used car and boat trade-ins. This year, on the eve of an election, he called a special session on law and order, and even his own party rejected the majority of his proposals. He said that sometimes you don't hit a home run. Well, when we needed him to step up to the plate, he didn't hit a home run, he struck out. The Witness Protection Fund doesn't even have funding.
I'm going to give you 30 seconds, Governor Parson. She said you struck out in the special session. Would you like to respond?
Oh, no, we didn't strike out at all. We did the things we needed to give law enforcement the tools they need. We protect victims and witnesses that do that. Number one, I might add the state auditor. Her liberal agenda is the cause of this problem from decade to decade to decade. And in 2.5 years, we did everything we can and will continue to do that to fight crime in the state of Missouri. And we have done just that. This wasn't a problem that happened in 2 years. And we've teamed up with the federal government when nobody had done that, the state levels, the local levels, to put our resources together. And we are, with legends, having good results and we're fighting crime in this state. And we'll continue to do that when it comes to fighting crime in this state.
He says your liberal agenda is the cause of crime in the state. Nicole Galloway, would you like to respond?
He's been governor for 2 years, lieutenant governor for years before that, and legislature over a decade before that. You know, he wants to point the finger at everyone else instead of taking responsibility for his own actions. And look, I know what he's referencing. I don't support defunding the police. He knows that. The only person on this stage that has defunded the police is Governor Parson, when he cut $1.8 million from our state's police force. Budgets are about priorities, and we need to prioritize giving resources to our law enforcement.
Our rules only have one rebuttal opportunity, but we're going to move on to the next question here. That comes from Emily Spain.
The Black Lives Matter movement has captured the country's attention after the death of George Floyd in Minnesota. The death of Michael Brown in Ferguson years ago continues to bring our state in the national spotlight. If elected governor, what, if any, social justice changes would you advocate for?
Mike Parson, you're first here.
Yeah, well, we've been working on that from day one. First of all, let me just say this. Black lives matter. All lives matter in this state. No matter who you are, where you're from, whether you're rich, poor, wherever you come from is important. When you're in the military like I was and you're in a foxhole, it don't matter what color somebody's skin is. It don't matter what your gender is. It's about taking care of one another, and that's what we've done in this state. We're doing reforms. The Post Commission just did some reforms across the state of Missouri. We teamed up with Lincoln University for right now to have the first African-American police academy in the state, by putting more police officers on the ground, to making sure we're doing better in community policing around the state. All of those things have been enacted, all of those things through my administration. We're just not talking about plans that there is no plan. We're talking about action. We're talking about doing things for the people that need it the worst.
Jerome Bauer.
I do support reparations. Maybe, perhaps not by that name. If reparations has a bad connotation from the last century, we could call it perhaps restitution or something. But a serious attempt to redress the legacy of slavery and racism. Race is, we really need to abolish that idea. Stop thinking in terms of black and white. And I know that's easier said than done. It might take another 400 years to abolish race and racism. And maybe then we can go on to address class and income equality. Well, I hope it doesn't take 400 years to do that, but we really do need to think differently.
Nicole Galloway.
After the killing of George Floyd, there have been rightful calls for change and some really amazing demonstrations of unity with law enforcement and members of their community standing together, asking and calling for change. I have put forward a comprehensive criminal justice and policing reform package that can build trust between law enforcement and the communities they serve. Now, Governor Parson has implemented some of these recommendations just this week. At the same time, though, his campaign is engaging in racially divisive tactics. We can't go down this path. It is hurting our state. It is holding us back. And so let's just call it for what it is. When his campaign and his apparatus wants to try to divide us on racial lines, they think that we're pointing the finger at each other, and then we'll be too busy to point the finger at him and hold him accountable for his failures to address violent crime.
Rik Combs.
Yes, I think first and foremost, Missourians are Missourians, no matter what their sex is, no matter what their race is or their religion. I view Missourians just as Missourians, no more, no less. I'm not into identity politics and never have been. When it comes to Antifa and Black Lives Matter, I'm pro-life. I've always been pro-life. I think all lives matter. Antifa and BLM as organizations are Marxist in nature. I will never be Marxist. I spent over 20 years in the Air Force to oppose communism, socialism, and I will be till the day I die. That's my promise to Missourians.
Nicole Galloway, you said that the governor his campaign was engaging in racially divisive tactics. I want to give you 30 seconds to actually explain what you are referring to, and then I'm going to give the governor 30 seconds to respond to that. What are you referring to there?
Sure. His campaign apparatus has put up some websites saying that incorrectly that I am pro-crime and listed pictures of many prominent black leaders in the state. He was called out. His campaign and his campaign apparatus and allies were called out in the media for engaging in racially divisive tactics.
Governor Parson.
First of all, my campaign has never run a negative ad about the state auditor. My campaign has not. But I will tell you the truth. Elizabeth Warren was endorsed by our state auditor, who does support defund the police. Cori Bush was the first person she went and endorsed, who does support defund the police. The head of the Democrat Party in the state of Missouri is walking down the streets with a bullhorn with cars and businesses being broke into and on fire. That's the truth of what's going on there. You might not say it here in this forum with everybody watching, but the point is, it is matter who you run with. It does matter when you're working with those people that do want to defund the police in this state. I will never defund the police officers, and I will always stand before these law enforcement officers and stand up for them in the state of Missouri.
Staying on this topic, Ruby Bailey, the next question's from you.
Certainly, thank you. Staying on this topic, I do wonder whether any of the candidates support reducing the amount of funding going to local and state law enforcement agencies and shifting some of that money to other types of community service, which is what some would refer to as the intent of defunding.
Jerome Bauer, you're first.
Absolutely, I support that. I mean, that's what we're doing in St. Louis with the Cure Violence Project. I mean, the police, it's not fair to them to expect them to be psychiatrists and social workers and marriage counselors and everything. I mean, really, they should be expected to do what they're trained to do. And defund the police is really a rhetorical de-escalation from FTP, and I'm not going to say what that is because I just plain don't like that awful F word. It's a rhetorical de-escalation. It works better out on the street. No justice, no peace. Revision public safety and public health doesn't really quite work. Defund the police, what does that really mean? Does it mean cut their salary or stop paying them? What would happen if we actually did that? They would go to work for private university police forces and private security, and they would moonlight in gated communities, and the rest of our cities would be, vigilante justice, and that's not right.
Nicole Galloway.
To be clear, I do not support defunding the police. There's only one person on this stage who has actually defunded the police, and that is Governor Parson, when he cut $1.8 million from our state's police force earlier this summer. I have proposed reforms to build trust between law enforcement and the communities that they serve. Our law enforcement are expected to do incredibly difficult work, and they need support, they need resources, but there shouldn't just be one slice of the pie. We should fund our police and fund support services. That's why I support things like Medicaid expansion, so folks can have access to health care. I support funding our school system to the highest amount so folks can have access to a good education. Unfortunately, we rely on our police officers for quick resolution instead of giving these deep problems that we have throughout our state the attention and the resources that they deserve.
Rik Combs.
Yes, when it comes to defunding the police or shifting funds, I think that's shifting funds is another term for defunding, I suppose. But I'm opposed to that. Speaking to law enforcement officers and peace officers from across the state, they tell me one of two things happens if you take money away. They lose officers or it hits the training budget. I think training is at the core of a lot of what we're talking about the training of police officers, law enforcement officers, and how they treat and interact with the public. That training, those training dollars are so important, and I think losing law enforcement officers or the prospect of doing that is not in the best interests of Missourians and certainly not in minority communities.
Mike Parson.
Yeah, I would never defund the police and never have defunded the police. Matter of fact, we just put $1 million in the Urban League to help with the police officers de-escalate crime. We just passed legislation to put more police officers on the ground. But to answer your question, you don't have to do both. You can get social workers out there. We've strengthened our social workers in the urban areas up there and continue to do that. The state auditor, every law enforcement agency in the state of Missouri has endorsed my candidacy for governor. 2 weeks after they did that, she released an audit criticizing our law enforcement officers for doing their jobs, for working overtime. In the middle of a pandemic, in the middle of a civil unrest, these guys are working their tail ends off to keep Missourians safe. And to be critical for them for times like this, for police officers working overtime, when you're 160 officers down, the entire state is having trouble hiring police officers. The highway patrol is having trouble finding police. The last thing we need to do is take anything away from our law enforcement officers in this state. And I won't do that. I'm going to help them do their job, and I'm going to put more law enforcement officers on the street.
The governor has cited an audit released by Auditor Nicole Galloway's office in which he says you criticize police for working overtime. 30 seconds to respond to that.
Governor Parson must be confused or not understand how audits work. I released an audit that was requested by the city of St. Louis to look at how the police department was following their own rules and procedures to keep officers safe, to make sure they're not working too much overtime, that they're not working too much so they can protect themselves, and when they're healthy, they can then protect the communities that they serve. I have worked hand in hand with law enforcement at the state, federal, and local levels to get real results for taxpayers. Highway Patrol might be having a hard time recruiting officers because he cut their budget.
Governor Parson, 30 seconds.
I don't know what she's talking about on cutting the budget on that. All I'm going to tell you is that I've been supportive of law enforcement all the time. You know, I just don't think you use your political position to attack and use your office for political gain, whether it's the Attorney General, whether it's writing op-eds on abortion, whether it's criticizing our police officers for working overtime. There's nobody knows any more about those police officers working overtime than I do. And I just don't believe what she just said about how that audit took place. You don't get to turn off the clock at 5 o'clock when you're a police officer in the middle of domestic violence, when you're working a homicide, when you're working wrecks. The people on the local levels know how to handle that. The administration of the police department, the cities do that on that.
The next question comes from Gary Castor.
All right, we're going to change the subject a bit to Clean Missouri. In 2018, voters passed the Clean Missouri Amendment, which changed the state's lobbying laws, campaign finance limits, and legislative redistricting process. This year, the legislature put Amendment 3 on the November ballot to reverse parts of that measure. Do you support Amendment 3? Why or why not?
Nicole Galloway, you're first.
I support Clean Missouri. I do not support Amendment 3. In November of 2018, over 60% of voters said they want a fair, transparent government, and they wanted to get rid of gerrymandering. I support the voters in their decision to support Clean Missouri. You know, within days and weeks of that passing, Governor Parson did an interview and said voters got it wrong, that they were confused, that they didn't know what they were doing, and that Governor Parson's going to fix it for you. He doesn't trust the voters. He doesn't respect their voice. I do, and so that's why I am not supporting Amendment 3.
Rik Combs.
That's a tough call on Amendment 3. On one hand, you have the Clean Missouri, which I thought was wrong to begin with because it merged a whole bunch of issues together in one ballot initiative, and I didn't think that was right to do to the voters. It's sort of a package deal. Oh, this is going to be good for Missouri, and that's how it was promoted. But on the other hand, the people of Missouri voted resoundingly for Clean Missouri, so I don't want to upset the wishes of the people, and we want to abide by their wishes. At this time, all I'll say is I'm leaning toward a yes vote on 3, and if somebody can compel me to vote the other way, I might be compelled, but right now I'm leaning toward a yes on Amendment 3.
Mike Parson.
Yeah, I agree with Mr. Combs. You know, there's a lot of things on these ballots that none of the big money behind this ever talked about how the redistricting would work. They talked about everything but that. This is a major shift in how we do elections in the state of Missouri. And I don't know what everybody understood or didn't understand, but going back a second time, making sure the voters understand directly what it is they're voting for. how that's going to look is never a bad issue. It's a good thing to go back for voters to take a second look at something this major of how we're going to change elections in the state and how it's going to work. And now we can talk about redistricting for the state of Missouri where everybody understands that and make it very clear and not have 4 or 5 different issues mixed in there to be able to talk about. That's what they always do on these initiative petitions. It's never the main issue. It's about all the other things. And that's exactly what they did, and that's why they spent a lot of money in the state doing that. So to go back to voters and ask them to say, hey, is this really what you want? I don't think it's bad. People are going to get to vote on it and see, and we're going to live with whatever they vote with.
Jerome Bauer.
I am against Amendment 3, and so is the Missouri Green Party. And the Missouri Green Party strongly endorsed Clean Missouri in the first place, and our party is really very democratic, and we work as a team. So I, in line with the Missouri Green Party, am opposed to Amendment 3, and Clean Missouri passed by over 60% of Missouri voters. So to overturn that before it's even been implemented is really, it's an insult to the voters. So let's implement Clean Missouri, and then if there are issues with it, there could be other ballot initiatives with a lot of discussion. We can tweak it and fix it and make it work properly instead of trying to overturn it. Thanks.
We're going to move to our next round of questions. This comes from Tricia Miller.
So let's talk transportation. The Missouri Department of Transportation says it needs hundreds of millions of dollars for roads and bridges. Voters defeated a fuel tax increase 2 years ago. Since then, the coronavirus has further impacted state revenues. What is your plan to improve the state's transportation system?
Rik Combs, you're first.
Yes, that's very, very important. As a lot of people know, and many people don't know, Missouri's in the top 10, I think 6 or 7 in the country, in road mileage and bridges and all that. It's a quite expansive system. And anybody that's been out and about the state, as all of us have, all the candidates, you see the roads are deteriorating, the bridges are deteriorating. I don't think new taxes are the answer. And one of the things I think about taxes, it seems like if we do a tax in Missouri, somehow it ends up in the general fund and gets squandered on something else. But with that said, with a budget of over $35 billion, you cannot tell me that we can't find money within the current budget to fund $100, $200, $300 million. It's there. It's there in the budget. We need to cut the fat, and we need to pay for our roads and bridges.
Mike Parson.
Yeah, I don't think there's any question about it. We've been working on that since day one. Infrastructure is one of the priorities of my administration when I started. That's why when we had to go to do the general revenue, we did the bonding plan we did. 250 new bridges in the state of Missouri through that bonding plan. Over $1 billion worth of construction in the state of Missouri. We made 50-50 money available for the counties and the cities to partner with them on projects they have in their towns and everything. And the last revenue bonds that we did that we just renewed, 178 million worth, we renewed at 0.038. Those are wise investments in our state, but we have to keep moving forward, whether it's the highway system, whether it's the airports, whether it's the rail, whether it's the rivers, or whether it's broadband. And we have to continue to do that. We just released $22 million for broadband to help in our state with infrastructure, to also help with telemedicine, telehealth. And we've been doing that from day one since I've been governor. And we will live within our means, and we still will do as much as we can for infrastructure in this state. But we definitely need a funding source at some point to address this issue.
Jerome Bauer.
Let's have a universal basic income in exchange for universal basic service. And that could include not only a revived Civilian Conservation Corps, but also getting people at work rebuilding roads and bridges in exchange for free college. Well, there's nothing free. I mean, you pay for it with your labor. So definitely we need infrastructure. I mean, paying more taxes to build it, that, you know, I'd be fine with that because I'm not averse to raising money when it's necessary to pay for public works. but there are many other ways that we could do it. Also, not just roads and bridges, but bicycle paths in rural areas, not just the Katy Trail, but practical bicycle paths and rural carpool cooperatives. So a lot of things that the state government could do to facilitate rural voluntary cooperatives.
Nicole Galloway.
The first thing that we can do to help our state and local budgets pay for transportation is to contain COVID, because its economic impacts are putting our budgets in peril. And as state auditor, I have found giveaways and loopholes that are providing no value to taxpayers. One of our most generous giveaways in the country to corporation gives away $121 million just last year. So I would look to government itself. I am the most fiscal conservative statewide office holder. Not only have I found waste and abuse in government, I've returned millions back to taxpayers from my own budget in the process. Governor Parson cannot lead our state in a fiscally responsible way because he's not a fiscal conservative. He's asked the state to pay tens of thousands of dollars for a personal driver. He's renovated his office. He takes airplane flights back and forth between his home and Jefferson City. We need true fiscal responsibility, particularly in this economic downturn.
Governor, I'm going to give you 30 seconds to respond to her comments about your desire for a personal driver taking your airplane flights.
Well, I think what the real truth is here is what I asked for them to hire somebody so the Capitol Police didn't have to park. Statewide elected officials like the state auditor, the legislatures, the senators and reps. We had the Capitol Police parking cars in the basement for all of these people. They need to be upstairs protecting the public, protecting school kids that are there. You don't need to have a police officer moving your cars around, parking them for you. I never asked for anybody to park my car. That's what that was all about. Again, another misleading statement, totally.
That's not what I was
30
referencing.
seconds.
When he was lieutenant governor, he asked the legislature for tens of thousands of dollars for his own personal driver as lieutenant governor. And the legislature responsibly said no to that.
I'm told it's time to take another break. So stay tuned and we'll be back with another round of questions. Welcome back to the Missouri gubernatorial debate. We're ready for our next round of questions, and this question comes from Emily Spain.
Thank you, David. What are your plans to increase economic development and bring jobs to the state of Missouri? And how would your plans support rural areas of our state?
Governor Parson, you're first.
Yeah, we've been doing that from day one. I mean, infrastructure, workforce development is the hugest things you can do in the state. It's why our state had the lowest unemployment in our state's history at 3.1. Why the African-American unemployment was at all-time record lows. It's why 40,000 new jobs were created, why businesses were coming to Missouri. Even during the pandemic, we've had Accenture Federal Service in St. Louis, 1,400 new jobs expanded. Chewy Pet Food just opened up a distribution center in Belton, Missouri. Our consumer spending is up 6.3% in the state of Missouri. Unemployment is at 7% when it was predicted to be at 16%. We're doing the right things because we're keeping our businesses open. We're getting people back to work. By 365,000 being on unemployment, 200,000 of those people are back in the workforce because we're leading the way in this nation. As I said earlier, 12th in the nation getting people back to work. And you have to focus on two things, infrastructure and workforce development. That's not a Democrat, that's not a Republican issue. That's a Missouri issue, and that's how we're really going to prepare our kids for the future of this state.
Jerome Bauer.
I would have student loan debt forgiveness for graduates who want to buy farmland and start organic farms. New York State has that. Why can't we? I have a former roommate who is a recent graduate of Webster University whose ambition is to be an organic farmer, but he'll never be able to afford farmland with his student loan debt. So that's one thing that I would do. And also investing in rural infrastructure, such as our broadband network, for example, and rural bicycle paths and rebuilding roads and bridges would certainly employ a lot of people. Thanks.
Nicole Galloway.
Unfortunately, we still have record high unemployment. And oftentimes our economic development strategies focus on chasing big out-of-state companies to come. And I think that we need to refocus on our small businesses, our community businesses that are rooted in the community, provide good paying jobs for folks close to home. We need to focus on workforce development. That means providing a good education for our children, K through 12, and higher education. It's so unfortunate that the governor had to cut $100 million from our higher education budgets this year after it was restored by the legislature. And $250 million was cut from our K through 12 education budgets this year. It is very short-sighted because we often hear that our small businesses, our large businesses are wanting a skilled and a trained workforce more than anything else. And as governor, I do everything I could to reverse those cuts.
Rik Combs.
Yes, thank you. That's a very important issue about the economic development in the state of Missouri. When we moved here, my wife and I moved here 11 years ago, I like to do as much research as I can about a state, and what I noticed was from there to the estimated census for 2020, from 2010 to 2020, is Missouri really hasn't grown. As governor, I would work with the legislature to try to get rid of our draconian income tax, personal property taxes, which are very regressive, and do away with corporate taxes. And what that'll do is that'll encourage businesses to come into the state of Missouri, and encourage people to move to Missouri and retain the people that we have in Missouri. And if you get rid of the corporate taxes, one of the things you do is get rid of the good old boy system of tax credits. Thank you.
Governor, I heard the auditor mention that she would restore cuts that you have made. Would you like 30 seconds to respond or explain that?
Yeah. First of all, I think you have to understand what a balanced budget means. And unfortunately, if the state auditor makes a comment like that, number one, we didn't cut 250, we cut 221,000 out of the education funds because everybody in Missouri had to tighten their belts what we were going through with the pandemic and the way things are in the state. Government doesn't get a free pass on that. We was up front with that, how we were going to implement that. And we're thankful we can release some of it, but because of the institutions we put in, the policy we put in to get these fundings back up. But everybody had to make a cut in the state of Missouri dealing with the pandemic.
Nicole Galloway, 30 seconds.
If we want to talk about a free pass, let's talk about illegal gambling machines that have popped up across our state that's diverting millions of dollars from K through 12 education. And the operators of these illegal machines have given his campaign apparatus thousands of dollars. As a result, he cut funding for the investigators for these illegal gambling machines. So under Governor Parson's watch, he figures out a way to benefit himself while education continues to struggle.
Our next question comes from Ruby Bailey.
Thank you. Missouri generally has some of the lowest tax rates in the country. Does the state need to raise more tax revenue to support your agenda? And if so, how much and where is it going to come from?
Jerome Bauer, you're first.
Well, I would certainly raise corporate taxes and also sin taxes, including taxes on recreational drugs, which we would like to legalize, tax, and regulate. That does not mean anything goes. It just means that to the extent possible, drug problems should be treated as mental health and public health issues. So certainly raising taxes from taxing drugs and a stock market transaction tax. That's something that we Greens would like to experiment with, see how we can make that work. But certainly, thanks.
Nicole Galloway.
I am not proposing any increases in taxes for the agendas that I have laid out. And as state auditor, I have found and identified loopholes and giveaways that provide no value to our taxpayers whatsoever. For instance, we have the most generous timely filing discount giveaway to corporations in the country. These are taxes that people pay. They pay sales taxes, and they think that it's going to their roads or to public safety, but instead, big box stores get to keep it for turning their sales tax to the state on time. We don't get a break for paying our taxes on time. Why should they have the most generous discount? That cost our state $121 million last year. We can do it in a way that continues to protect small businesses, but really provides value to taxpayers, so they get a value for every dollar they put into government.
Rik Combs.
I think first and foremost, as I said before, if we reduce some of these taxes, some of these terrible taxes, draconian state income tax, the personal property tax, things like that, and do away with corporate taxes, I think you'll see businesses and industries. It'll help our small business people across the state, and people will have more disposable income. When they take that money and spend it, hopefully within state and in their local communities, those revenues will rise. As the old saying goes, a rising tide raises all ships. And so that's what I think when you slash taxes, when you slash taxes and when you cut state spending, right now our state spending and local government spending seemingly out of control. Once we get that under control and start cutting some of that, it makes life a whole lot easier to live under. And I think you're going to see a Missouri that's very much more prosperous than right now. Thank you.
Mike Parson.
I won't raise taxes in Missouri unless the people of the state say they want their taxes raised. What I will do I'll look at fraud and waste. Like in the Medicaid system, when I first become officer and I put a new director in there, and when people made the assumption, the state auditor, that we kicked 100,000 kids, that never happened. We didn't kick one child off the Medicaid rolls. We simply verified whether they were qualified to be on there or not, whether their parents were, which is supposed to be done annually by the state auditor, according to Senator McCaskill at the time. And what we've done is we haven't verified the rolls for 10 years, for a decade, under the leadership of other governors and this state auditor. We have people we found that was making $650,000 a year and owned 6 homes. We had a lady in Florida, we paid for her to have a child in Florida that didn't even live in Missouri, and she's receiving our benefits. We had people from Illinois that was coming to Missouri signing up for our benefits because nobody was audited them, haven't for 1 decade. By doing those kind of things, you can find money to pay for programs that are assessed, but you have to get the waste and fraud out, no matter where it's at.
We have time for one more question if we move quickly, guys. Gary Castor.
Missouri voters in August approved a Medicaid expansion for lower income adults. How would you implement Medicaid expansion, and how would you cover the state's share of the funding?
Nicole Galloway.
I support Medicaid expansion just as the majority of Missourians do, and I know that it can be implemented in a fiscally responsible way without raising taxes or gutting other accounts. We can look at independent studies that have shown that Medicaid expansion in Missouri is budget neutral and in the long run saves our state billions of dollars. We can also look at the experience of 37 other states that have expanded Medicaid, and we can have those benefits that they've seen in other states here in our state. Governor Parson has a terrible record on health care. He did kick 100,000 kids off their health insurance. He has the state of Missouri in a lawsuit right now to take away coverage for pre-existing conditions for over 2 million Missourians, and he opposes Medicaid expansion in the midst of this pandemic. I believe that Missourians need and deserve access to health care. It's one of the most important determinants of social mobility in our state.
Rik Combs.
Yes, I think the Medicaid expansion is a difficult question for Missourians. I think some people can see the benefits, but on a ledger basis, when you start looking at the money that it's going to cost the state of Missouri, that's got to come out of somewhere. No new taxes would be my pledge on that, and that we could reach down into these bloated budgets that we have in the state and help pay for that. That said, the danger of doing the expanded Medicaid, I know the federal government comes in with a lot of money for that, but the federal government's $27 trillion in debt. So there may be a day where the federal government says, we don't have any money for you, then that entire bill will fall to Missourians, and that's a lot of money.
Mike Parson.
Well, I don't think there's any question. The state auditor's own research shows it's going to be somewhere, she left out one part, 0 to 200 million was going to be the estimated cost in there. And I think the bigger question is to ask the question is, why didn't we audit these rolls before? Why didn't we look at the Medicaid? And why didn't we verify all these people before this? This is the people of the state voted for this. We're going to have to implement it, but it's not going to be free. Anytime there's an expansion in state government, it is never free. Trust me, I've been around long enough to realize that every program expands. It costs more money, and so has Medicaid, even in its normal settings. It would engage somewhere between $200 million a year just under the old formula in the state of Missouri that we have to account for. And we're going to have to account for that money again. But the people voted for it, we're going to put it in place, and we're just going to have to do that and balance the budget at the same time.
Jerome Bauer.
I signed the petition to get Medicaid expansion on the ballot, and I voted for it, and I'm glad it passed, because that is an improvement over what we have right now. 100,000 kids should not have been kicked out of off of Medicaid with adverse action notices, and I almost lost my Medicaid too. So I feel very strongly about this. Healthcare is a human right, and we can do better than Medicaid expansion. We can have single-payer healthcare for all, and that is the position of the Missouri Green Party. And we've organized a number of panels to discuss how to do this, how to implement this with Missourians for Single Payer. And the Missourians for Single Payer people actually wrote most of our healthcare platform. We'd like to do more of those panels in the future to discuss how we're going to pay this and how we're going to make this work. Because it does work in many European countries. And really, healthcare for all will pay for itself.
We now need to move to our closing statements of the debate. As we indicated at the start, the candidates will be delivering their closing statements in the reverse order that they delivered their opening statements. That means that the first to deliver closing remarks is Green Party candidate Jerome Bauer.
Why vote Green? Isn't that a wasted vote? Well, no, it's not. We seem to be running to the left of just about everybody and just about everything. But we're really fiscally quite conservative, especially when it comes to regressive sales taxes that disproportionately affect the poor, to pay for boondoggle trolleys and boondoggle stadiums and other big boondoggles that we cannot afford, where we can't even seem to feed and house and transport our people reliably, sustainably, and affordably. We don't take corporate money, and for that reason we're not beholden to corporations or really to anybody. So we will raise issues that other candidates and parties will not raise. And that is the historical function of an American third party, to talk about things that other people don't want to talk about, to raise some interesting ideas and talking points and just get the discussion going. When we get ranked choice voting, you'll all be able to vote for all four of us in the order of your choice. Unfortunately, we don't have that yet, so you're going to have to make a choice. And I want to thank all the many voters who've told me personally that they will vote for me every time they see me on the ballot. I thank you for your vote and for your continued vote, but many people expect the top of the ticket races, president and governor, to be especially close this year. So if you want to vote for any of our down ballot candidates for the Missouri Green Party, then we will be able to maintain ballot access and keep on building our grassroots alternative political party. And I'd also like to recommend that you might want to cast a vote or two for the Libertarians as well, to keep them on the ballot, because the more voices, the better.
Republican Party candidate, Governor Mike Parson.
Thank you. Well, thanks everybody for listening in today. Again, thanks for everybody that's up on the stage today, being part of the process. For me, it all started, like I said in the beginning, it started with a very humble beginning about work ethic, about Christian values, about moral values, about serving this country in the United States Army, understanding what the Pledge of Allegiance means, understanding what the Star-Spangled Banner means, what this flag of this country means, and that people before me that died for this country to give us the fundamental rights of the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, the Declaration of Independence. Nobody up on this stage will have more experience in law enforcement than I will, 22 years, all the way from losing an officer in the line of duty, having one shot 6 times and surviving, thank goodness, losing a brother-in-law as an EMT. Those kind of real life experience is what makes you a leader. Owning your own business, understanding what it takes to run a business for years, to be able to do that, to be able to raise a family, to be a good husband, to be a good father, to have 6 grandchildren, to make sure you understand the value of all Missourians, no matter what color your skin is, no matter whether you're a woman or a man. The one thing I do know, as far as where we are for women in the workforce, we have to do something every day to make sure we have a fair and balanced approach to that. 16 of my cabinet members in state government are 10 of the 16 are women. Half the appointments I've made are women. Not because they were women, because they were qualified to do their jobs. I believe everybody is equal. I believe everybody has a right to the American dream. But the only way that happens is if we stand up for basic freedoms and we protect individual rights and we make sure that those next generations, my kids, your kids, our grandkids, have the same opportunities all we've had. But you have to fight for that every day. That's why I want to run for governor, and I request humbly for your vote, and it is an honor and privilege to be the 57th governor of the state of Missouri.
Libertarian Party candidate Rik Combs.
Fellow Missourians, on the 3rd of November, you're going to have a choice as to who your next governor is going to be. My campaign's based on free enterprise and smaller government, more efficient government, freedom, slashing taxes, reducing waste, cutting spending, and protection of personal property. It's ideal for working people. It's ideal for the middle class, ranchers and farmers and their small businessmen all across the state that are suffering through some hard times. Make no mistake about it, the middle class is under assault, politically, socially, and culturally, all across our country, and that includes Missouri. I am the champion of the middle class. I came from the middle class, and I view myself in that light. Do you feel disaffected, ignored, taken for granted by the 2 major political parties? We're a good choice for you. The quintessential question for Missourians is, what type of government do you want in the future? Do you want a large, expansive government that's involved in every facet of your life, or do you want freedom? Do you want independence and a smaller, more efficient government? What do you choose? Are special interests, lobbyists, and machine politics going to rule the day, as they've done for decades in Missouri? Or do we have true freedom? As an Air Force officer, I spent over 20 years fighting for this country. I'm very, very proud of that. I'm very honored to be able to run in Missouri for governor. Growing up on a cattle farm, if you had told me that I'd be running for governor in Missouri many decades hence, I'd say you're out of your mind. But this has been a wonderful ride, and it shows how great America is. I ask for your vote on November 3rd. Thank you, and God bless.
Democratic Party candidate, State Auditor Nicole Galloway.
When I launched this campaign for governor a year ago, I never could have imagined the challenges and the crisis we would be facing in 2020. But I knew then that Missouri's working families needed a change, and I am even more certain of it now. Missouri is facing so many challenges, a virus that's impacting our most vulnerable communities, the worst economic shock since the Great Depression, chronic underinvestment in health care and education, persistent gun violence in cities across our state, and tough conversations about how to make Missouri more equitable and just. On our biggest challenges, Governor Parson's solutions are just too small. If he had answers, we would have seen them already. He's had his chance. He's failed the test of leadership. He's just in over his head. The corruption of our politics is how Governor Parson got to where he is. He rose through the ranks of the establishment with help from powerful friends, that are now spending millions so they can hold on to power, so they can get what they want while Missourians struggle. I'm offering a new way where the working people of the state and their needs are at the center of everything I do with working people at the table. As state auditor, I have looked under the hood of government. I have found that it is broken, it's not working. I've identified over $370 million in government waste, abuse, fraud. And I've worked hand in hand with law enforcement to bring 63 criminal counts against corrupt public officials in this state, both Republicans and Democrats. I have demanded efficiency, accountability, and transparency. I've put forward comprehensive plans to lower the cost of health care, to contain this virus, and provide more Missourians economic opportunity. We can't just go back to where we were on the eve of this crisis because where we were wasn't good enough for too many people. As governor, I will put the health, the well-being, the security of every Missourian at the center of what I do. Join me at NicoleGalloway.com.
Thank you. This concludes the 2020 gubernatorial debate, sponsored by the Missouri Press Association in conjunction with KOMU, coming to you from the Missouri Theater in Columbia. I want to thank each of our candidates for being here and participating in this debate. And for the voters, the next decision is yours. You can make your voice be heard by casting a ballot. Thank you for viewing and listening today.